All right, Michael Durant, really appreciate it. I said before we started here, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I've known I have your book in the Company of Heroes. I've had this book since I was in Iraq in 2009, and a lot of people know your story from the movie Black Hawk Down and stuff like that, and Mike Bowden's book Black Hawk Down. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on today. I'd like to start off by asking you why you joined the Army. What was the decision behind that? I understand you had a military.
Yeah, I had a lot of relatives that were either in the National Guard or had served on active duty, one Marine Corps, most Army. I actually don't know that we had, well, no, I had an uncle who was Air Force, so I guess we had everybody represented. But really, the catalyst for me was flying in a helicopter. I was a teenager at the time. The guy that I was flying with was a warrant officer in the New Hampshire Guard, and he had his own business where he did various odd jobs for the state, or he would fly people into NASCAR races. There's a NASCAR track there in New Hampshire. Just all sorts of different things. And anyway, he was a friend of the family. Had a chance to go fly with him, and I was just blown away by it. I couldn't believe how incredible that experience was. There's pretty big mountains in New Hampshire, and we flew over the top of the largest one, Mount Washington, and basically hovering up there. And I don't know. I don't want to say that he was recruiting me, but I think he was just trying to inspire me, and he certainly did. And when I found out that you could join the military and go to flight school and do this for a living, and that's essentially what set me on that path.
That's awesome. I think an impressionable moment like that, those core memories really drive the decisions you make later in life. And I can see how that would be as a kid. That would be so, I don't know, amazing, hovering in a helicopter right next to the mountains and stuff like that. I love flying when I was in, most of the time, depending on what we were in, but I enjoyed it. I understand why some people don't. But I also understand why some people get so into it. That's all they want to do. The pilots that's all they want to be. That's all they've ever wanted to be as a pilot. I understand why, because it's a thrill to be up there. And I've never been in control of the aircraft. So that's got to be a completely different feeling, obviously. And we'll get into that. Did you have any pressure from the military family to serve? Like, hey, we all serve, you should do it. Or was it something you came to on your own?
No, really no pressure at all. Nothing against blue collar jobs. They're great. We need them. I really respect people that, are out there working hard every day to produce all the things that we enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
But, for me to have an opportunity to go do something that was fun at the same time, it was a no brainer. As soon as I was exposed to it, I thought, wow, this is just an incredible opportunity, and I got to do everything I can to take advantage of it.
You're like the ideal recruit that the recruiter wants to walk in the door. You show up with like, I'm just here to join. You don't need to convince me kind of deal. But let's, for those that don't know, you didn't join the Army and go right into becoming a pilot. You want to talk about, joining and then the training and stuff that you did?
Yeah. So, whether it was true or not, no one will ever know. But when I did go talk to the recruiter, they said that going straight to flight school was not available at the time. It's all about slots and allocations and whatever the priorities are for the military. And, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I don't know the difference.
Yeah.
So they said, but then we have this. So you could say it was like a bait and switch deal. I'm not sure, but it was a pretty good deal nonetheless. It was to go to language school and serve in military intelligence as a voice intercept operator. And it's a 1-year school to learn. For me, it was Spanish, and then deploy overseas and, listen to different broadcasts and type down summaries of them, depending on what your job is. My job was just to find them and then type down a summary of it in English, so that if it had any military intelligence value, somebody would go, listen to it and type it out in greater detail. And then they said, and you can apply for flight school while you're on active duty. So it sounded like a pretty good deal to me. And in my mind, it was, well, if I do this and I can't apply for flight school, or if I don't get accepted, then I'll just, serve my time and get back out and go do something else. And as it turned out, I did apply from Panama, actually, and was accepted and ended up going.
Now, this was late 70s, right? 78, if I remember correctly, is when you joined.
Yeah. By the time I'm, in the military and applying for flight school, it's early 80s. Yeah.
Okay. When it's interesting, when you went to DLI, was that still in Monterey at the time?
Yep.
I just had a
Yep.
guy on a couple episodes ago, Ian Fritz, who is I think they call him Air Force cryptologic specialist. Who same thing. He went and learned either Pashto or Dari. I think actually both. And then he went to Afghanistan and would be in the back of AC-130s and be doing the information, taking down the information and sharing it if necessary. It's crazy that I've now two people in a row. Like before talking to him, I didn't even realize that was like. Well, I guess I kind of knew it was a job, but having two people in a row that did something similar like that. When I was talking to Ian, I was telling him it's got to be kind of weird to know the language really well and listen into these conversations. Did you find it kind of like voyeuristic, I guess, to be doing a job like that?
Yeah, it was. I don't want to call it secret agent like, but it seemed, it certainly had. There was a draw to it that
For sure.
this could. I remember I was actually on duty, and no one will remember this in all likelihood, but the leader of Panama while I was there died in a plane crash. It was Omar Torrijos. The airport is named after him, actually, if you've been there. And you know, we're the first ones to hear the reports that there's been an issue with the airplane, and then we send the message at the highest possible priority level up to DC, letting the government, U.S. government, know that this has happened. And I mean, it just for when you're that young to be involved in that kind of stuff, being a kid from northern New Hampshire that never imagined getting involved in these sort of things. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And then Central America, there's all sorts of things going on. Whether or not we're listening to El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia, they're primarily communicating on HF radios, and you can pick up HF radios a long way away. So we're monitoring all this traffic and searching for it, and it was pretty interesting. At least initially it was. I don't know if I would have wanted to do it for 20 years, but I found it pretty interesting.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. I mean, you get a peek behind the curtain of how intelligence is driven, how decisions are made, stuff like that, what based off what. Seeing something like that, equate it to like a kid right now that's out on one of these ships that's launching attacks against the Houthis. Some kid from the Midwest or wherever is like, holy crap, like I'm directly involved with this right now. And people may not know, but the people launching these, ordnance off ships and stuff, that ordnance is stored, cared for, and sometimes the button is pushed by people that are under 25 years old. They're just given the command by an officer, and they're over there the ones doing it. That's like it's hard for a normal person that's never been in the military to kind of understand that kind of, I guess, pressure that can get put on you and the seriousness of the job, at such a young age.
Yeah, no question about it. And I think it creates this caring about your job, which I don't see everywhere. I guess I'm not being critical of any particular generation, but an important thing I think for us as a nation is to have a large percentage of people who really care about what they do. That's the only way we're going to be successful going forward. If nobody cares, then nothing's going to be done well, and it's all going to fall apart. So getting that responsibility put on your shoulders and getting the training that you need to do those jobs. Some of them are, you could argue are menial tasks, but they're all part of a system that has an incredible effect in the end, at the macro level. And that's why I think the military for a lot of young people is a great option, because it's great training, great opportunity. And if you work hard and, you take advantage of the opportunities that are there, the potential is almost unlimited.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of people that say today's military is not like it used to be or whatever, and that people shouldn't join. To that point, I would say if you abandon it, then the people that you hate being in the military are the only people that are going to be there, and it's just going to get that much worse and everything like that. Two, I don't think that's really the case. I think there's a ton of opportunity, like you said. You get a lot of life experience. You get a lot of diversity of thought because you're talking to people from all over the country, and the world. Actually, I remember my first platoon. I had a guy in my platoon that was from Jamaica. It was you just have people that you've never met. A kid from New York City talking to a kid from like Oklahoma, and they figuring out what those people are actually like. You get a better perspective of the country itself and the people that are in it. Yeah, let's talk about, let's get into your flight time then. You wanted to become a pilot. So that was what was really kind of driving you there. Did you consider getting out at all, or what kind of made you go, okay, I'm for sure going to go apply for flight training now?
So funny. I remember being in Panama because that's where I got assigned once I finished my training. We were sitting on the beach and a flight of Hueys came overhead at low level.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're familiar with helicopters, you know the Huey has a very distinct sound. It's the traditional wop, wop, wop that most people, would equate to, at least from my generation. And they were at very low level in formation. There's people in the back with their legs hanging out. And again, I got that sort of feeling, man, that is like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And,
For sure.
I need to get this paperwork going. And I applied from Panama. Of course, typical. My first submission was lost somewhere because we're not applying online in 1980. We're applying through paper snail mail, and it got lost. I had to do it again, and then the second time around, I got accepted.
That had to been probably a awesome moment in time for you. Like, man, I got accepted. But also, were you kind of like, oh man, what have I gotten myself into? Because careful what you ask for, right?
Yeah, no, I didn't really feel that way.
Nice.
I felt like, wow, all right, now it's on me. I've got the opportunity. Now I need to take advantage of it and do all I can to be successful here.
Yeah. When you get to flight school, let's talk about, okay, let's start from the beginning. When you get to flight school, how does that begin? Do you don't jump right into a helicopter, right? I mean, can you describe flight school in the 80s in the Army?
Yeah, and it's gone through various evolutions, and I probably couldn't tell you exactly the flow today, but then you went through warrant officer candidate training first. And the whole idea here is, before we spend all this money to put somebody in the cockpit, let's make sure that they can fulfill the responsibilities and be an officer in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
Just not everyone can. I mean, it's hard to explain, what would get you disqualified, but I guess the easiest thing that comes to mind is if you have no respect for authority, or, you can't understand that there are some things you really probably don't want to do, but you have to do because that's just part of it. And you accept that and you move forward and you get it done. That's the kind of person we're looking for. If you're that, rebellious, the heck with this, this is stupid, I'm not doing it kind of person, then you're going to get washed out. And believe it or not, there are people like that. And there's a lot of other things, maybe you don't meet the physical fitness standards, maybe you don't meet the educational standards, because there's not a whole lot of academic work, but there's some. And, you just got to make sure that people have you're proving what you saw in their packet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because their packet's just paper. Now you get to see the real person. Is this person who we thought they were in their packet? So you get through that. I think it was 8 weeks. And then you start into the actual flight training part. And the first part is, ground training, where you're learning about aerodynamics and you're learning about weather and your, aeromedical stuff, meaning how your body responds to the effects of flying and those sort of things. And then, again, that's not too many people don't make it through there. And then you start your basic flight training in a very rudimentary helicopter. At the time, this thing, actually, the tail rotor was driven by rubber belts like you would have on the engine of your car.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, because it's cheap, right? Again, you want to be able to determine whether or not someone has the potential to do this in the most inexpensive way possible. So these are very cheap helicopters, but they did the job. And the amazing thing to me now, looking back, is we were soloing in, I think I had 6.5 hours.
That's
So
crazy.
6.5 hours in a seat, and then you're given the keys and told to take this thing around the pattern. Now you're not doing anything too sophisticated. You're just taking off and doing a pattern around the airfield. But when you're in that thing by yourself for the first time, I mean, probably everybody remembers the first time they were allowed to drive a car by themselves. Take that up a level, and it was amazing. But that's how you learn. You get put into these situations, you challenge yourself, and you get better.
Yeah,
And then
I don't think that's still the way they do it now. I think they give them a little bit more than 6 hours before they give the student the keys and go, here you go, man, take it around the
yeah,
take it around the pattern.
well, we use simulators a lot now. We had simulators then, but they were not very sophisticated. Today,
Mm-hmm.
simulators are, I'm not going to say, just like flying a real machine, but in the commercial world, you can get rated in an aircraft, and the first time you actually fly the real aircraft type, there's passengers in the back. I mean, that's how good simulators are.
Oh, I didn't
So,
know that.
yeah, I know that everyone's canceling their flight reservations for the weekend after hearing that, I guess. But that is, again, it's about money, right? It costs a lot of money
Yeah.
to fly, a high-end airplane around, commercial airplane. So why would you use that to train somebody when you could train them? Now they're not the captain, they're not, they're a co-pilot, but
Mm-hmm.
still, first time they've ever flown the real aircraft, they got passengers in the back.
I had an awesome opportunity. My assistant air officer when I was with the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, Hippie, he was an F-18 pilot. He took I was a JTAC at the time, and he took me and some of the other fires guys, some of the JTACs and stuff, over to I'm thinking Miramar, and we got to jump in the F-18 simulators there. And I was like, man, this is, because you see these gaming simulators, like the racing simulators or the flight simulator, the old Microsoft Flight Simulator, and how people have these like elaborate setups and stuff. But until you get into one of these actual like modern simulators, it's kind of mind blowing. It's I can't imagine how much money goes into that. But like you said, that's a fraction of what they would spend in maintenance and fuel and everything and danger, of letting student pilots get into jets and fly around.
Right. The safety factor is certainly there because you can expose people to malfunctions, weather situations, put them in critical decision-making situations that you can't do in the real aircraft safely.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've been using simulators for, I guess, 40 years, 50 years now. And as you say, the fidelity today is just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we do, and not the same thing, but we do simulators. We would use simulators or simulated training for JTACs and stuff like that online, not online, but on computers and stuff. And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, this is super realistic. It's walking you through the steps of what you would do in this situation. That way, when it happens in real life, it's not the first time you've ever experienced it, or at least you have kind of a path to go in rather than just kind of winging it.
Right. It's crawl, walk, run. It's you get exposed to the basics and the fundamentals, and then you continuously progress, and then you're ultimately out there in the real thing.
How often, or I mean, I imagine pilots with 6 hours taking off and landing a lot. Were there a lot of issues? Were there crashes? I mean, that
It's
seems
funny you ask. My roommate had a Midair, and it wasn't a catastrophic Midair, thank goodness. But these traffic patterns that we're doing at these, they call them stage fields. Most of them, at least the ones we were using, had 6 runways, and they're all parallel. So you're coming around, and you probably can't see it because of the camera angle here, but you imagine doing opposite traffic. So you're doing opposite traffic patterns. Okay.
mm-hmm.
So these two guys come in, both on what's called base, which is your final turn to final. And then they make their turns to final, and they both overshoot. So you got these parallel runways, both guys overshoot, and then they correct their altitudes, and they actually mesh. The rotor blades of the one chop the antenna and the landing gear off the bottom of the other aircraft. Now, remember, this is a pilot with less than 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So to them, this is something catastrophic has happened. They don't even know they had a midair. The one guy, it's called auto rotating, which is what you do if you lose an engine. He hadn't lost an engine, but it's the only thing he could think of to do. So he basically just bottomed out all the power and took the aircraft to the ground. The other pilot realized he could control the aircraft and got it on the ground. Both guys were fine. Neither one of them got set back. When I say set back, it means you go to the next class in the flow. They both stayed with our class and they both kept going. I mean, it was, but that's probably an extreme example. I don't think that happens very often, but it just coincidentally did happen in my room.
That's how lucky is that to run into someone else with your rotor blades and not immediately just hit the ground after that. That's insane.
So I guess it's proof that that was a good helicopter to use for that level of training, because not only was it inexpensive, but it was pretty robust in order to be able to take a minor collision. It's essentially a but when you come to rotor blades, there's no minor collisions, I guess.
I was going to say, you're using terms like minor collision, cheap. We're getting cheap helicopters for training. I'm like, I don't think I would want to associate cheap and flying in any way, or like minor collisions,
Let's change the word to cost effective.
Cost effective. Yeah. Yeah. Did your roommate, after that incident, did that spook him at all? Because some people, they have an incident and they're like, that was good enough for me. I don't want to fly anymore.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. He kept going.
Like, we can hit each other and be okay. Well, this is easier than I thought.
Like a video game, right? Yeah.
Oh man, that's crazy. So what did you start? What was the training platform again? And then what did you move on to?
So in Army terms, it's called a TH-55. Most people would have never seen one. It's just this little orange bubble thing with a pencil sticking out the back and a tail rotor on the end of the pencil. And again, that's how you basically learn how to fly a helicopter. You learn how to hover, you learn how to do traffic patterns, land, take off, slopes. So you're landing on a angled piece of ground, so you can understand how you set one skid down first, and then the aircraft kind of rolls gently to the downhill side. You learn all those basic skills, and then at the time you would move into a Huey. Everybody in the class. And the Huey, after flying that TH-55, was like flying a space shuttle. I mean, it was this is a lot more instruments, a lot more capability, bigger aircraft, and then you start to learn instruments, you learn tactical procedures. You're out there doing you might do sling loads where you're actually hauling something underneath the aircraft, flying in adverse weather conditions. I mean, basically you're learning all of the basic tasks that you will be performing as ultimately a pilot once you graduate. And for my timeline, there was only one other aircraft that you would fly in flight school. And that is if you went to scout track, which is where you're going to fly, unfortunately, an aircraft that doesn't even really exist in the inventory anymore, an OH-58 or a reconnaissance aircraft. And, they broke off, I think probably about the last 12 weeks of flight school, they broke off. I was dead set on flying Blackhawks. That's what I wanted to fly. So I was glad I didn't end up going to scout track. And then, they're learning a few different things. They have obviously a slightly different mission, and they're going to focus on all that in that platform. But for the rest of us, we all go through the rest in Hueys. You take your final check ride in Hueys. And then, depending on where you are in the class, you get an advanced aircraft. Now, there weren't very many at the time. Apaches didn't exist. There was one Blackhawk slot, and there was one Chinook slot. And I got the Blackhawk slot. So and again, that, was it luck? Yeah. I mean, there could have been 0 Blackhawk slots.
Yeah.
But it was also, I worked really hard and I did well. I was number 2 in the class. So I got the Blackhawk.
That seems to be a common theme. Like, if you want to get a certain platform, then you got to be the best, in the top couple in your class, or you're not going to get it. Right. At this time frame, you said you start your flight training early 80s. I imagine there's still a large holdover of Vietnam vets. What did you take away? Did they try to instill any kind of like inside knowledge or anything from their time as pilots in Vietnam and that real world experience?
Oh, for sure. When you're talking about the tactical flight aspects, map of the earth flying, it's called, where basically down flying in the trees sort of thing. And, those tactics, all of that was developed in Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam was the helicopter war. So, and many of the instructors, not all, but many of the instructors had experience from Vietnam. So you're learning from a person who not only knows this task, but did this in combat for real at some point in their lives. So I think it added to the credibility of those instructors. And there's a bit of a mixed bag of Vietnam vets, and I'm not trying to sound critical here, but I think everybody's aware, what was going on in the country at the time and how chaotic it was. The guys that stayed in all really cared about and liked the military, so you weren't exposed to any, negative Vietnam perspective. I would say these are all people that stayed in after the war, wanted to continue to serve, and for whatever reason, their personality, their values, their commitment to the country, whatever it is, we're all just positive role models. And regardless of their experience in Vietnam, as horrific as I'm sure that was for a lot of people, didn't articulate that, to us now coming in the military. They were basically, encouraging us and showing us the way using their combat proven experience.
Yeah. So also a question, I guess, from that era in Vietnam, a lot of pilots were flying Cobras. That's when the Cobras first came out. The Army was using them. Did they still have them in the inventory at that time, or was that not even in the flight options anymore? Yeah,
Cobras were around. Yep. But I don't think, maybe a couple guys got Cobras. I don't remember. There had to be a couple guys get Cobras, but maybe they came out of the scout group. I honestly don't recall. I just remember that there was one Chinook, one Blackhawk, and the rest stayed in Hueys, because Blackhawks were fairly new at the time. I mean, the earliest Blackhawks are 78 models, and there might have been a few 77s, but there's not a lot in the Army yet. So it's the newest thing we got going.
It's crazy that the Blackhawk was late 70s. I mean, we're still flying Huey, so I guess it's not that crazy, but it's crazy to think that airframe has been around that long and it's just still doing daily work, The Apache replaced the Cobra for the Army, correct?
Right. But it didn't come around till the mid 80s. So I was just a little bit too early, because an Apache's, actually all the platforms we have are fantastic. Chinook's great platform. Apache's great platform. It would have been a tough decision, I think, for me had the Apache been fielded, which one I would have preferred, because shooting is awesome. And I got to do that later with the Blackhawk. And that's a heck of a way to make a living right there. Let me tell you, shooting unlimited amounts of ordnance on someone else's dime in an aircraft is a lot of fun.
Oh, I bet. I guess that was going to be my next question. If you guys did any close air support training in the Huey before you went to the Blackhawk.
Not in the Huey, because I went to Blackhawk transition immediately. So as soon as flight school was over, I stayed at Rucker and got qualified in the Blackhawk before I went to my first assignment.
What was that?
Medevac in Korea, which I wasn't all that excited about, but in the end, looking back, it's probably the best assignment you could get, because we flew a ton. I flew 500 hours my first year, and this is peacetime Army. And peacetime flying hours are very hard to get, and all the missions are single ship missions. Now you might say, well, wouldn't that hurt you doing multi-ship missions later? Not really, because early on, to me, what you're trying to develop is situational awareness, judgment, decision making, being able to make the right call at the right time. And the only way to get all that experience is if you're out there, just put in the responsibility. I was the first Blackhawk guy to get to that unit, so they don't even have their aircraft yet. And now, even though I'm the youngest guy in the unit, I'm the only Blackhawk qualified guy. So they get me up to speed really quickly as a unit trainer to teach people how to fly along the demilitarized zone in Korea. And then when the aircraft come, I'm like the most experienced guy they got on the DMZ that's qualified in a Blackhawk. So I just flew my tail off. And again, getting all that, when you encounter weather or emergency situation, or in Medevac, I mean, the mission is an emergency situation. I
Yeah.
flew 150 real world missions where we're doing everything from, aircraft incidents to, I mean, there are a few that stand out. One of the most dramatic to me was there was an armored personnel carrier that had done a river crossing. Just again, that's part of their basic tasks, like our basic tasks in aviation. They got to go practice this stuff and understand how to do it. And they swamped it. And one of the guys inside wasn't a good swimmer, and he popped his flotation device inside the APC. So now he can't fit through the hole. And the APC went to the bottom of the river and he went with it. And so we land, and there's a little bit of time here. So we shut the aircraft down. And they're now trying to pull the APC out with another one using a cable. They had divers go in, connect the cable up to the APC, and they're winching it out of the water. And all his buddies are standing there on the shore, right? And the APC gets right to the point where it's about to come out of the water, and it's full of water. So the thing weighs like 3 times what it normally weighs, and all that extra weight snapped the cable. So now the APC rolls back into the river with the guy. I mean, it was really, you could just see the emotions on all the guys in the unit. And it really, that's the one thing when you fly Medevac that you don't see that much of, because you show up, they load them on board, and you fly away. This particular case, because of the unique aspects of that incident, you're right there with all of his peers and comrades and leadership, and sort of feeling the emotion that they're all going through watching all this. When we finally got him out, I mean, there was no way this guy was going to survive. He'd been underwater for half an hour, but we didn't have a doctor with us. So we got to try to keep him alive in the back of the aircraft or bring him back to life all the way to the hospital. And again, that's one of 150. And talk about growing up fast, as a 22-year-old, when you're involved in all that, and you're the pilot in command. I mean, you're in charge of all this. So it was, you either mature or you're not going to survive. And that's why I think it was such a great first assignment, because such a variety of things that we got exposed to: mountains, wires, night, weather. I mean, you name it. And you're either going to get better or something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. Whereas if you would have gone to one of the other squadrons or units, and you may just be flying training missions over and over again, which are good. And, it's good to get out there and do stuff, but nothing puts the stress on like a real world situation. I mean, it is what it is. That's crazy though. That's unfortunate. I've talked to a couple people that have done that have flown the DMZ area, were stationed in Korea. And I'm honestly, before talking to them, I didn't realize. I was like, hey, is it pretty chill? Is there, I mean, it seems like most of the stuff is rhetoric from the countries. Are they really still at war? Is it kind of like a whatever? And they're like, no, it's for real serious the whole time. I mean, obviously it's always serious, but they're like, I don't know. Can you kind of relay the experience of South Korea, North Korea, and what it was like to work on the DMZ there?
Well, keep in mind also that we don't have GPS at this point in history. So the only way you're navigating is on a map, and you have a compass and a map. And it's very easy to get disoriented and fly the wrong way, especially at night. I mean, some of these areas are sparsely populated, so you don't even see a lot of lights, and trying to figure out where you are. And if you cross into the North Korean airspace, they will shoot you down. I mean, that's the reality of it. And because we were a Medevac, we had a responsibility to be able to fly up close to the DMZ, and that's why they call it corridor qualified. There's this boundary basically that no one is allowed to go into on the U.S. side unless you're qualified to go in there. And there weren't a lot of people qualified to go in there because there's no reason to go in there unless you're in Medevac. And then you might have to go evacuate somebody. So we had to get trained on the entire peninsula. We did, from one coast to the other. And that's a big part of why I got so many hours, is I spent hours and hours and hours training other people on all the key landmarks, so that if you did get misoriented, you would not accidentally fly into North Korean airspace. Because like I said, I mean, they shoot you down. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean I wanted to go. I've talked to people that have been to Korea that were stationed there and they all said it was miserable, they didn't like it. But I think it'd be cool just to like see it, see the DMZ, kind of experience the culture a little bit, kind of, I'm all about going overseas and just kind of not just wasting my time over there, at least get something out of it. A lot of people prefer to just sit in the barracks and drink and stuff, but I think, experiencing culture is a little bit more. Did you ever have that kind of opportunity to like go out and, see what Korea was about, see the people and kind of what their thoughts were about you guys being there and stuff?
Yeah. Not to say I didn't drink in the barracks occasionally.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course.
But yeah, in fact, it sounds like you and I are of the same mindset. I liked it so much I extended. The tour is a 1-year tour if you're unaccompanied, meaning no family, and I was at the time. But I liked it so much I said, hey, I'll stay longer. So I stayed an extra 8 months and was actually in Korea for 20 months. And during that time, my parents actually came over. They had a program that the Korean government was very supportive of because they were trying to build their relationships for a variety of reasons with the U.S. So they would, I don't know if they co-sponsored it, but it was certainly not that expensive considering what you got. And so they flew over and then we went to all the various parts of the country and saw the culture and ate the Korean food and so on and so forth. And that was great. They really enjoyed it. And I actually got to take my father up in a Blackhawk, which was pretty cool too. And took him up along the DMZ and probably one of the highlights of his life, actually.
That's awesome. He was retired military. Had he flown before?
National Guard, yeah. I'm not. Yeah, he'd flown, but not a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome though to come and see like how you've grown as a person and as a soldier and stuff like that, and where you're at in your career. That's a really cool opportunity. The only thing I've ever had like that, like close to that, is where they allow on ship when you're heading home on the West Coast. Once you hit Hawaii, they have what's called a Tiger Cruise, and they'll let families fly out to the ship and spend the last like week of sailing from Hawaii back to California on the ship with you, which I don't recommend anybody does. I don't know why anybody would ever want to do that. I remember some of the other Marines' dad. I remember like one guy had his dad there sleeping, and the racks are just so small. People don't, and when you see those photos of like tiny racks in like the 70s or World War II, that's exactly what it is. You have almost no room and they're stacked up high. And I remember this guy's dad just probably could barely fit in the rack, getting out of it, try to go to use the head in the middle of the night. I was like, this looks miserable for this guy. Like, ship life is not great, so don't put your families through that. What was out? I understand while you were in Korea is when you first heard about the 160th.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a guy there. I don't remember his name, but the unit had just been formed, and he was at the time. It was one of those things where you really weren't supposed to talk publicly about it, but everybody's sort of like, "Hey, did you hear about this sort of thing? And this is going on, and this is what these guys are getting ready to do." And it sounded pretty intriguing to me.
I mean, more intriguing. How did it? What was different about it, or made it sound more enticing than continuing to be like a Medevac pilot, which was obviously had its own adventures?
Well, it sounded like the next level. There was equipment that they were talking about having on the aircraft that I didn't even know existed, and just we called them the customers. The customers that the unit supported were the best in the military, and it, to me, again, felt like that next level, taking it up another level. And again, sort of like I talked about early on in this discussion, to me, the key is seeing these opportunities and then taking advantage of them.
Yeah.
That is the key. And for me, this was that next opportunity is find out about this unit. Could I go do this? And certainly got the juices flowing.
I've mentioned that so many times on the podcast. I'm like, you have to take your career into your own hands. Nobody cares about your career as much as you do. If there's something that you want to do, you got to just go do it. You have to put in the legwork. Someone's not going to find the information out for you. Someone else isn't going to apply for you. You have to do it. And a lot of people have these opportunities that come up and it passes them by super quick because they're indecisive and they don't jump on that opportunity when it presents itself. In a time when, go ahead.
Only listen to the naysayers. I think that's another big thing is, and what, everybody's different. Why there are naysayers out there, I'm sure there's a bunch of different reasons, but there's always going to be those naysayers, and I think part of it, now that the unit's been around for a while, comes from people who wanted to come and were not accepted. If you're not accepted, very few people are going to say it's on them. A lot of people are going to say, I got screwed, or, it's a jacked up process, or, something like that. And that starts to sort of proliferate a little bit. I don't think it's a systemic problem, but bottom line is, if you listen to the naysayers, then you're probably never going to go take advantage of opportunities that are available to you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's like when someone says, only 20% of SEALs graduate buds. Well, someone's got to be in that 20%. You know what I'm saying? Like, why not me? There's not enough people out there that have that attitude of the why not me? Why can't it be me? Why can't I be the best at this thing? They like you were saying, those naysayers, it's easy to just not even try to self-select, and that's the worst, because in situations like this, if it was really driving you and you were like, you know what, I'm not even going to try because I would probably not make it anyways. For me, that would bug me for years afterwards. I'd be like, oh man, could I have made it? And then you see other people that did make it and you're like, oh, I'm better than that guy, or like whatever. Self-selecting is dumb, and if that's one thing people can take away from this is like, get out there and try the things that you want to do. Somebody has to be the thing that you think is super awesome, so.
Swing at the ball. Swing at the ball. Can't be afraid to fail. That's my favorite saying. I just wrote it to a letter to our youngest son, that you will never realize your full potential if you're afraid to fail.
Yeah, 100%. So I know that you got to take a break. You just want to pause here? Yeah. So we took a break. We were talking about you finding out about the 160th while you were in Korea. So what began your transition there? You're moving from your first duty station to the next. What's that catalyst to go to a unit that no one's heard of, or supposed to have?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it sounded Tom Clancy-ish to me. That's sort of what I relate to. And I know that's a little bit out of date for some people, but, I read a lot of his novels, and it had that kind of intrigue to it. So ignorant though of the system, when I got to Fort Campbell, which is where the unit is located, my orders were to go to the 101st. And so I went and I signed in, which was technically a mistake, because once I signed in, I was committed to going there. And then I went over to the 160th, and they told me, well, unfortunately you signed in. If you were, this seasoned combat veteran with thousands and thousands of hours, maybe we'd go to bat and try to get you out of that commitment, but you're a little bit of an unknown. So go do your 2 years, the 101st, get some more flight time, and then come back. So I did. And as it turned out, that was the right answer, because I got to fill in all the blanks that I hadn't been able to fill in as a medevac pilot. Multi-ship missions, a lot more night vision goggles, more of a tactical type role instead of the medevac role. And that helped me a lot in terms of being ready to go do the mission at the 160th.
Did you feel like you were, did you feel like you were kind of behind the power curve a little bit going over there and not having that tactical experience? Because now you're kind of a more senior pilot, right? You've been doing it for a few years. It's not like you're a new guy.
Right. I didn't know what I didn't know. I'd always been pretty good at what I would, whenever I was evaluated, on a check ride or trying to get qualified to do something, I didn't ever have too much trouble doing it. So I guess I figured I could just adapt to the mission requirements of the 160th. But having gone to the 101st for 2 years was good for me.
And did you guys, what kind of deployments or what were you doing with the 101st?
Yeah, we did a couple of pretty cool deployments. 29 Palms. We went to Honduras. It was great experience. I also went to the instructor pilot course, which I probably wouldn't have gotten a slot that early at the 160th. So, now I'm filling the role of an instructor. And again, that gives you more opportunity to fly more. You log more hours, so it was all good.
That's awesome. That's such a pre GWAT like going to Honduras. You were in South America before. Like I know there's still stuff going on down there and there's still missions going on down there, but I feel like it seems like the footprint was much larger then. Am I correct?
Oh, the focus. I just read an article from Southcom perspective about how they're almost forgotten. I mean, and there is a lot going on down there, and there's so many different countries and political instability. You pick your country, there's probably something going on, but because there's so much focus on the Middle East and obviously China and Russia and Ukraine, that they don't get a whole lot of attention. But I would say, in terms of the overall situation in Central and South America, it's probably not a whole lot different than it was 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, when you were there, what kind of missions were you guys doing
In Honduras?
Yeah.
A lot of what we did on peacetime deployments is work with the local military. So one of the most interesting things that I did at that point in my career was haul around a platoon of Honduran military in the back of a Blackhawk. You want to talk about feeling like they've been abducted by aliens. I mean, these guys were, looking at this aircraft like this is from outer space. I mean, it's just, I'll never forget their faces. And I have to tell a story that I've always been entertained by. It's probably not a good thing to do, but we did it. So, they're all in the back. They can't hear us communicating among the crew.
Mm-hmm.
So we came up with this little plan to mess with them. In a helicopter, you've got the stick on the left called the collective, which is basically your power, right? If you bottom out the collective, you're coming out of the sky. The cyclic, which is between your knees, is directional. So if you want to go forward more, you push the cyclic forward. You want to turn right, you push the cyclic right. So in a Blackhawk, there's a key right in the middle of the main instrument panel. And it says pretty clearly off and on, which is, whether you're a Spanish speaker or an English speaker, it's pretty obvious what that means, right? So we're pointing at the key, and there's, I think we had 26 of them back there because there's no seats in the aircraft, and we just jammed them all in. Then maybe there's like 8 of them that can look into the cockpit, and they're all looking in the cockpit, and we're pointing at the key, and we're coordinating over intercom, which they can't hear, that the one guy turns the key to off, the other guy bottoms out the collective. So from their perspective, we're shutting off the helicopter. Now, what they don't know is that key does nothing once you're flying. You can take it out, throw it away. You only need it to start the engines. So we turn the key back on, pull the collective back up, start climbing back up again, and they're sort of relieved. And we do it a couple more times, and then the third time, the guy takes the key out, and he drops it, and he acts like he's scrambling to try to pick it up. And we're falling out of the sky, and these guys back there, thank goodness none of them decided to jump out.
Oh,
because
man.
they had that look on their face like they're about to crash. And anyway, we were very entertained by this whole thing. Probably not the right thing to do diplomatically, but it was fun as hell. And anyway,
I don't think that's uncommon. I think air crews love to mess with their passengers a little bit because you guys know the capabilities and what you're doing, and we're back there just like, hey, I'm here for the ride. I remember being in a 53 one time, and we were coming back to, I think we were going to Pendleton, I can't remember, and the pilot, for whatever reason, did this super hard cut, and we were almost completely sideways, and I'm like, what the? I'd been sleeping, I'm flying back from ship or something. I fell asleep, and that's one way to wake up right there, is when a pilot does some crazy stuff.
Yeah, we definitely have the advantage, but anyway, that's the kind of stuff that we did, and we there were some U.S. infantry there as well, so we would take them out into the jungle and then recover them, and you basically just training in an environment that you're not accustomed to, that has its own unique characteristics. I mean, the jungle, it's hard to find places to land. Certainly for the ground force, there's a lot of creatures out there that they don't normally encounter at their home station, and they've got to figure all that stuff out, how to navigate, how to do their tactics. But our role is pretty straightforward: just bring it from point A to point B and do it safely.
Yeah, I've always said that's a whole nother game. I mean, being a JTAC, being a forward observer for artillery, I can't imagine how difficult it is to provide fire support or try to provide fire support in a jungle kind of situation without. I mean, maybe it's not as bad now because you have drones and stuff. Like we have our handheld drones and stuff that you can maybe help figure out targeting. But I know in Vietnam, a lot of times the jungle was so thick they would adjust rounds by sound and stuff. Different things like that. I'm like, that's just. So I can imagine going there and being a pilot and having to do, pickups and stuff like that just increases that difficulty. What did you find to be the most difficult kind of missions to fly in general?
Well, it's always harder to fly at night, which we did a lot. We flew night vision goggles a lot. And over water is very difficult as well if you don't do it a lot, because once you lose all reference, if you're going offshore and all of a sudden the lights of the shore are behind you, if you're not accustomed to that, it can be very, very confusing. And in fact, a lot of aircraft incidents occur as a result of that because people encounter that unexpectedly. If you remember Kennedy, he crashed his private plane off the coast of Massachusetts, I think it was, and it was attributed to that. He lost reference with the lights. It's nighttime. You can't see, you can't tell what's up, what's down. And if you're not a proficient instrument pilot, you can get disoriented and flip the aircraft upside down really easily. So that, those, and I guess that's, back to what was so great about flying Blackhawks is that the mission is so diverse. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're basically doing everything you do with a helicopter, you do in a Blackhawk. And so you got to experience all that stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, and depending on the variant you fly now, and the modern ones, Navy has Blackhawks, Army has Blackhawks. I think the Air Force has some. There's so many different missions. I know even on the Navy side, they have different anti-submarine roles. They have close air support roles. They have all kinds of different stuff. So
search and rescue. Yep.
Yeah, search and rescue. Very diverse. And I don't know. It's a really cool platform. I mean, Blackhawks and Hueys were the only thing I ever enjoyed flying in. Being in the back of a 53 was okay. It wasn't too bad. I didn't necessarily like Ospreys. I didn't mind Ospreys, but I've taken off and landed on ships enough where I just didn't like that feeling. It's such a weird feeling, especially when you're in the back. You don't know anything's going on. The way an Osprey takes off from a ship, it hovers a little bit, and then it cuts real hard to the left and then flies off. And when it does that, it's it's just, but anyways, when you're doing these Blackhawk missions, you're doing them at night. Did you run into any concerns with this turf flying and stuff like that? Was there issues where you had pilots almost hit things and stuff at night? I mean,
yeah, I would say, your biggest hazards at night would be power lines, because if you don't see the towers, you're not going to see the wires. And not all power lines have balls on them. I'm sure most people have seen the balls on the wires, but they're not all like that. So especially in Korea, there was wires everywhere. And it seemed like they put up power lines overnight. All of a sudden you might have gone out and done a reconnaissance of your route in the daytime, and then you go the next day and all of a sudden there's power lines there. But that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was hard to stay on top of all the new hazards. Towers is another one. Most of those are lit, but sometimes, the lights out or whatever. We had in 160th, we had a guy hit a tower on a cross country flight. And then the other one is just, they call it control flight into terrain, meaning you don't see the ground coming. It really is a big issue in the desert because there's not a lot of contrast there. And all of a sudden, there can be a dune that ramps up and you're just flying along and you think you're at 50 feet and all of a sudden you hit the desert. And those things just are much more challenging and require much higher level of concentration than they do in the daytime. In the daytime, you can see all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not nearly the hazard that it is. I guess the last one would be brownout. Helicopters, if you've ever seen them land in the desert or really any place where there's loose debris on the ground, you'll see a big dust cloud.
Mm-hmm.
The movie Black Hawk Down, they show it fairly well in there, what that looks like. You end up in the middle of this thing and now you can't see anything. again, at night, that's even harder because it's harder to see through it. Think about you're driving on at night in the fog. If you turn your lights on bright, you get all that refraction. It's not exactly the same thing, but it gives you some sense of, why it could be more difficult at night.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of those things are more difficult. And that's why we train at night. That's why we fly as much as we do, so that we can get to the point where we're comfortable dealing with all those challenges on a regular basis.
Now, while you're here at the 101st and you're deploying and you're training and you're doing different things, are you still trying to learn more about the 160th, or is that still that's the end state? Are you working towards that still? What's the process there?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, what would help me a lot is a friend of mine who was a warrant officer, and then he became a second lieutenant, got into the unit and was telling me all about it. And that just got those juices flowing again, because he's talking about, I mentioned some equipment. At that point, we had installed some of the first FLIRs on. I mean, I didn't even know FLIR technology existed. The average person certainly didn't know it existed. And it's already on the aircraft and they're flying it,
Mm-hmm.
and digital cockpits, things that today are, everybody's got them. Back then, nobody even had ever seen one, and they've got it in the aircraft already. So the mission, the equipment, and he was certainly encouraging me to continue my interest level, and I think it just took it up another notch.
Did the command, is that something that they encourage for you to kind of push on to that next level, or are they like, man, we're going to be losing a good guy if he goes over there? How did that look?
It depends. It varies by the commander. I know, some commanders are, I guess you could look at it like a football coach, right? Who's some players are going to go to the draft because they think their chances are really good this year, and they're going to forego their last year of eligibility. And some coaches are going to say, I want what's best for my player. That is probably in their own best interest. Other coaches are going to think of it as, man, this is really going to hurt my team. I wish this guy wouldn't go.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the same thing, right? You if you really do care about your people and you care about their career progression and, them realizing their goals and objectives, then you like to see that happen. If you're more focused on your mission, which you should be, I mean, that's your responsibility, then you're probably going to regret the fact that they're leaving, and you got to find sort of that balance in the middle, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you run into that at all levels too. I remember when I deployed in 2011 with 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, I had a radio operator that I wanted to be my team's comm chief. And I remember my captain, who was the 210 liaison officer, was like, you can't take him because who would I have back here for the ops I got going on? And I'm like, this is all training. Like, we're going to Afghanistan. And that was his justification. And the guy ended up getting out right after, not too long after we deployed, because he wanted to deploy and stuff. He didn't want to be a training guy when there's actual opportunities out there. Yeah, it's tough like that. Again, like you said, we talked about earlier in the conversation, it's one of those things too where you got to, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. You got to put it out there that you want these things and make it obvious. And this is what I'm striving towards. At the same time, not pissing off your command, being a good, an asset to everyone. That's how you prove that you're good for that job, is being the best at it, at your current command. So, how did the transition over, when you applied for it, how did that look?
Yes, it's a pretty thorough assessment, which it should be. It's not right for everybody. And, they want to know, first of all, can you fly? You got to be able to fly. You have to be a good pilot. You have to be able to, the physical fitness standards are slightly higher.
Mm-hmm.
There's a swim test. There's a psychological evaluation. You do a land navigation. You do a check ride. You face a board at the end. I mean, there's quite a bit to it. And, there's very few people, I would say, that probably are a slam dunk, that at the end, everybody on the board says, yeah, we got to have that person. There's probably usually some dissension among the board. I don't know, because it's not formally disclosed, but I think there might have been one or two in the board when I was assessed that probably thought that I was not in the right stuff, to use that term. But there were enough that did, and I got in, and went straight into green platoon training, which is again another 9 months. So you think about, you've already been to flight school, you already got all this other flight time and experience. Now you got to go through 9 more months of training to learn the equipment, learn the tactics, learn the mission, and prove that you should be put in the cockpit to go fly these missions.
What parts of that training really stood out to you?
Well, survival school, I would say, is a big one. At the time, no one else in Army aviation was going to survival school except the 160th in aviation. It's part of the sea level, or it's part of a SFQ course. And we would go into that phase of SFQ course just for the survival piece and then come back out. So it's the same course that the SF guys go through. And, it's a demanding course. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you go to the Air Force, Navy, or Army survival school. It's tough. And I said it was the best training that I'd been through outside of flight school when it was over, because it's as real as it gets. They can't make it any more real without, probably creating some legal problems. But that and just all the flying we did. We flew a lot in training, just to get qualified in all these different things that we have to do.
I've heard multiple people say, everyone says that's gone to SEAR. They're like, that was probably the best training I've done. It's almost unanimous. When you're in there and you're green platoon and you're getting ready to start your flying, what are you being assessed for? Because you're already a pilot, you're already an instructor pilot. What's the assessment at this point look like?
A lot of focus on navigation, because even though we had GPS at the time, or it's just emerging. Actually, when I was going through green platoon, we didn't even have GPS yet. We had other systems that were electronic based, but not as accurate as GPS. So the focus is you have to be able to get to the target on time with a map and a clock and a compass. So that's where the focus was. And, under night vision goggles, when you're trying to find something small, finding a runway or an airport is a piece of cake, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're trying to find this very obscure spot on the earth under night vision goggles, using nothing but a map, a compass, and a clock, it's pretty difficult. And but that's what our customers are expecting of us. Our mission is to get them where they want to go every time on time. So we emphasize that relentlessly. And and then like fast roping, which I think most military people are familiar with what that is today, but back then nobody was doing. We're the only ones doing it. Which, if you're not familiar with the term, is you're coming in fast, you flare the aircraft, you come to a stop at a hover, they throw the ropes and they slide down the ropes. It's a bit tricky. There's a performance issue with the aircraft. If you don't do it right, you're demanding a lot of power to get it to stop and bring it to a hover. Again, you have to terminate at the right spot, because if you're like fast roping to a ship, if you overshoot the deck, then you're putting them in the water. So it takes a lot of practice to get that right under night vision goggles. Later on, not at this point in green platoon for me, but we ended up putting probes on the aircraft, which allow you to refuel in flight. That's another very difficult task. I did have the opportunity to do it before I retired. And again, it's tricky. It's in certain conditions, driving that probe into that floating basket that's out there in space, when it looks like you're 5 feet from the aircraft, the tanker aircraft. And again, we're talking rotor blades, right? We're not talking about a wing that if it taps the wing of the other aircraft, you got maybe a little bit of damage. You're talking about rotor blades. If they hit that aircraft, which happens occasionally, it's catastrophic. And, it takes a lot of practice to get good at that. And, again, landing on ships, all of these different tasks are things that you practice and practice and practice, so that when you're called upon to do it in the real world, you're ready to go.
Yeah, it looks, for outsiders seeing it when it's done properly, it seems routine. You fly up and hook up to the basket doing the refueling. And there's a pretty famous video out there of a 53 that was doing a refuel, and something happened with the aircraft or something, and the blades came down and actually cut the hose that the basket was on. And it just shows like that right there could have been, luckily no issues. I mean, damage to the aircraft obviously, but that could have been a major catastrophic event. It's just such a dangerous thing that you're just kind of doing every day. You know, it becomes routine almost. Yeah. So now you're going through and you're doing this training. You said you want to be as ready as possible for your customers. At what point does the 160th believe that you're ready enough to go out and do actual missions?
So once you finish Green Platoon, again, things may have changed a little bit, but this is how it worked back when I did it. You're considered a basic mission qualified pilot, which means you can be a co-pilot on a customer mission. And that's when you really start to get the valuable experience, because now you actually are carrying customers. It's a real mission. You're flying with a more seasoned, experienced person in the other seat. And, you start to learn how it's really done. And the good news is, I think in terms of how it's really done versus how it's taught are pretty similar. Mm-hmm. I mean, it may vary slightly from person to person because, they've refined their technique where they might do some subtle thing a little bit different, but generally speaking, the way you learn it is the way it's done.
Yeah. When you start doing these missions, were you surprised by the missions that you were doing?
Yeah. I mean, I'll still never forget our first deployment after I come out of Green Platoon. I mean, we load up these C5s. There's Navy SEALs on board. They've got their fast boats already on the C5. We load our helicopters and we fly all the way to Thailand. And we go do live fire training, parachute training, movements through the jungle. I mean, you name it. And it was like, wow, this really is Tom Clancy stuff. This is as cool as I could imagine it being, and that was just a training exercise.
Yeah.
And then we recovered. So it was just, and then the next 5 years were all of that and more, with multiple combat deployments in between.
Can you talk about what your first actual combat mission was with the 160th?
Yeah, it qualifies as a combat mission. It wasn't really combat. It's just very similar to what's going on today. The Iranians were causing trouble in the Persian Gulf. They were mining, trying to disrupt the flow of oil and shipping lanes. And we were over there basing off of barges to try to catch them in the act. And we did. In fact, the first tactical engagement using night vision goggles was a guy from our unit, Little Bird pilots. They disabled what was called a bog hammer. It was this sort of tactical Iranian boat that they were going out into the shipping lanes, and it had like a tailgate on it, and they pushed the mine out the back, and then they carry on. So you had to really be there at the moment that they deployed the mine. Our guys saw them do it. They got approval through the chain of command to engage. They disabled. It was called the Iran Ajar, was the name of the boat. They shot rockets, minigun, disabled the boat, captured the people on the boat, turned them over, and we had stone cold evidence that the Iranians were doing what we said they were doing. I wasn't involved in a tactical mission that was quite that exciting. Things had calmed down quite a bit, but it was still some of the hardest flying I ever did, flying over the Persian Gulf in a sandstorm, low level. I can't articulate how difficult that is. You're at 30 feet over the water. You can't see anything. You're too far away from land for there to be any lights, and you all of a sudden in a sandstorm. It was humbling, and I respect the guys. I've always considered myself a pretty good pilot. I respect the guys that were more experienced than me and were able to help me figure out how to do that without putting it in the water, because it's a very, very challenging environment.
Challenging in that you can't see anything, but it's also challenging for the mechanics of the aircraft itself. When you have all those particles in the air and stuff. And I mean, for people that have never been in a sandstorm, it's hard to describe what it's like when you see this wall of sand coming towards you and then you're just enveloped in it.
Yeah.
And I was in one in Iraq one time, and I was moving from one spot to another on a base on foot, and I had a guy with me, and he didn't have his iPro or something like that. And it was nighttime, and I remember he just held on to my backpack, and I had two Surefire flashlights in front of me, just trying to be able to see. And I'm like following a road, a yellow line on the road, because I knew if I follow this road, it'll take me to where I need to go. But I can't see anything, and that's just walking. I can't imagine, trying to fly through something like that. When in a situation like that, were you transiting and you just got hit by it, or was
Yeah,
that there was an operation going on during it?
I think that was my actual first flight out to the barge. We left. We were, if you want to call it basing, our intermediate staging base was in Bahrain. So we were, that's where the logistics were. And when you flew in and out of the area, that's where you flew into. And then you had to fly the helicopter out to the barge. And I think that was the actual first flight in the region for me. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be entertaining if this is what every night is like out here.
Yeah. When you're flying in the Blackhawks, what kind of armament do you guys have? Do you get miniguns on the doors? What are you looking at for weapons?
Yeah. So in that role, that's the primary configuration is miniguns, one on each side, and the crew chiefs double as door gunners.
They no kind of rocket pods or anything on those?
Well, we did that later.
Okay.
In my career there at the unit, I was very fortunate to be able to get involved in that. And ultimately, we will put rocket pods, miniguns, 30 millimeter, Hellfire. That was all while I was there. And then since then, they put some anti-aircraft stuff on there, and they probably have some precision guided rockets as well. It is an incredibly capable platform.
Yeah.
There's only at the time we only configured 10 aircraft to be able to do that, and ultimately use them in Desert Storm, and it was used extensively in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's interesting as as crappy as war is, we see the technology advance. I know when I got out, APKWS was becoming, even more popular for rockets and stuff because of the precision rather than slinging out 5 or 6 unguided rockets, throw one that's, way more accurate. So, yeah. So you guys were door guns only. That's pretty interesting. I mean, that's decent firepower, but it's not a lot if you run into, I don't know, anti-aircraft weapons on the ground, because the range of a door gun isn't too long. Did you guys have any issues with that while you're flying these missions, anti-aircraft?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I will be shot down by an RPG, which is not really an anti-aircraft weapon, but on almost every mission, we've got attack assets with us. Usually, little birds, which are organic to the 160th,
Mm-hmm.
AH-6s, but I mean, oftentimes AC-130s, fast movers, whatever we think is necessary based on the threat analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I meant in the Persian Gulf itself. I know about Somalia.
There.
How long after this first deployment was your deployment to Somalia? When did that start picking up?
So there's 2 others in between. There's Just Cause and then Desert Storm, and then Somalia is. So I went to Prime Chance in August of '88, and then Somalia is October. Well, we deployed in August of '93, so 5 years later.
All right, before we get to that, let's talk about Just Cause. What was your role there?
So Just Cause, I have said since it happened, is the greatest mission that I've ever been involved in. I mean, it was incredible how complicated it was and how well it all went. When you think about everything that happened at H-Hour, there's not anything that compares, I don't think. I mean, we took down with multiple airfields. We liberated a prisoner from the Modelo prison. We, basically took over the country in a day. Now, it's a little bit of an advantage, I guess, when you have fixed U.S. airfields that you can operate out of. But still, all those tactical operations had to occur. My role was not quite that glamorous. We were going to take control of Rio Hato, which is a big airfield down the coast. A lot of Noriega's troops were there, and this is the largest airborne drop since Vietnam. The Rangers came in, I think it was somewhere on the order of 20 or 30 C-130s worth of drops. And we were down underneath this watching it, and it was absolutely incredible. Well, let me back up. The first H-hour hit was a 2,000-pound bomb from a stealth bomber, which had never been used before. So we're already sort of making history here with the F-117. And obviously, once a 2,000-pound bomb goes off on the airfield, it gets everybody awake. So then the thing turns into a hornet's nest. And now you got all these Rangers dropping into the airfield to do an airfield seizure. There was an anti-aircraft gun on the end of the runway. And there were two Apaches with us. They'd never been used before in combat either. Their mission was, I believe, to disable that AAA, it's called, anti-aircraft artillery. But they encountered weapons system problems. You know, it's just not a criticism of the platform. You heard me say earlier, it's an absolutely great platform. But when they're new, there's usually issues that you just haven't uncovered yet. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it takes a little bit of greening, I guess, if you will, to get them performing like they need to. As I understand it, the problem with the guns on that particular mission was the vibration of the 30 millimeter was so significant that it would cause electrical problems in the aircraft, and it had not been vetted yet. Don't take that to the bank. You know, if you're an Apache guy out there listening, you can wave the BS flag. I might not be right. All I can tell you is they mission aborted within about 5 minutes. So now we're watching this AAA gun shoot up at these 130s. The comms were not great. I can't point my finger at why that is. I felt like we could have rolled in there with our aircraft and used our minigun to disable that AAA because, you know, this thing it's not a ZSU 23-4. I mean, this is a manually cranked AAA gun. I don't even know if it was 23 millimeter.
Like the GPU-2 or something?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about here. So one of the regrets, and I have several in my life, but from a combat regret, not doing something, I think back at that moment, we should have, because I feel confident we could have. Mm-hmm. We could have hovered right up to that thing underneath, because, I mean, it's shooting up, right? So they can't hear us because there's all these C-130s and all this fire coming from this AAA gun. We could have rolled in there with our miniguns and strafed the crap out of it and probably disabled it. And we talked about it and decided that, hey, look, that's not our mission. There's attack helicopters out here. We have, you know, we didn't even know we could have ended up getting shot down ourselves by friendly fire by going in there and trying to do something like that. But in the end, I know some of the 130s got hit. I know some Rangers got hit. I don't know that there were fatalities, but I do know that there were some injuries and some aircraft were hit.
I believe on that one, if it's the same, is this when they did the rescue of Kurt Muse and Modelo?
Yeah, that's the Modelo prison. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I had Del Comstock on, and I think he was saying that one of the helos got shot down, and they landed, and this was like as they were pulling out, and he said that was like one of the scariest things he thought is that now they got to go back in to do the recovery of that, because he's like, I can't believe we lived through that, and he was talking about that AAA gun shooting at him and stuff. Yeah, that's something else. That would, what was the up on ramp for an event like that? How far in advance did you know this was going to be occurring? How long did you have to prepare for that?
That's the great thing. That's the great thing about the unit is we are usually preparing for contingency missions long before they ever happen, mm-hmm. because, you know, based on the analysis of what we think is going to occur in a certain area, and it may not be exactly right, but we knew Noriega was a problem, and we knew at some point something was going to have to be done. So we've been practicing similar type missions for that takedown for years. Mm-hmm. And actually, from the time my pager went off to H-hour was less than 2 days.
Wow.
I mean, we were ready to go.
That's awesome. That's awesome response, you know, and we talk about that while I was in, there's different units that have different roles as these quick response. Like, hey, you're on a 48-hour watch, whatever. You're on a 48-hour response time for the next 6 months. Your unit's been designated as whatever. And it's always like, okay, you know, kind of thing. So it's crazy when you hear that someone actually got called up, and in that 48-hour timeline, you're boots on the ground, you know, slinging lead out there doing whatever it is you were asked to do. You know, it's not many countries can do that.
No. And and really not many organizations can do it. And that's why the focus has to be so. There has to be so much emphasis on training and readiness, and you can't just go from idle to full RPM. You know, I mean, you've got to have that build up and that preparation. I mean, logistics, everything.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
It doesn't just happen, and that's why our military has to train, and that's why, that comes at a price.
When you're in a unit like that and the tempo is high, the demands are high, it's basically zero fail missions all the time. Are there guys that they get into it and they start flying, and then the leadership goes, you know what, this was a mistake. We shouldn't have, accepted him or whatever. He shouldn't have been selected. We're going to have to bench you, man. Does that ever happen? Or is it more guys just get tired of the mission and leave on their own?
Well, as much as I hate to say it, and I think this is probably still true, some people make it through the process that shouldn't. It's not a lot, but a few. And I think the way the process works to prevent that from becoming a problem is they just don't progress any further.
Mm-hmm.
So they may never become anything more than a co-pilot. Because there's two more levels. There's a full mission qualified pilot, which means you can be a pilot in command on these missions. And then there's a flight lead, which means you're in charge of the whole thing. And if a guy is not demonstrating that he has good situational awareness, or he can't really fly, or bad decision making, I can't think of a time when somebody was actually forced out of the unit. I mean, they'll find a role for the person. They've obviously got abilities, because they wouldn't be there if they didn't.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just not, in this seat on this mission.
After this, you're talking about the Gulf War. What was your guys' role in the Gulf War?
So there's one where I had a sexy role. So we had configured our Blackhawks as attack helicopters by then. I was one of the first guys to get qualified. In fact, I was. Cliff Walcott and I took our check rides the same night. We're the first armed Blackhawk pilots in the Army. So and then we qualify a few more. So Cliff and I were the instructors, and we ended up with enough guys where we could man 2 teams of 2. So we had 4 Blackhawks configured as attack helicopters. And our mission was to go out and disable Scud missiles, which were very politically significant in the Gulf War, because the Iraqis were trying to draw the Israelis into the fight, and they were launching Scuds into Israel, if you remember all that. Mm-hmm. So it was a high priority to basically using Patriots in some case to try to shoot down the Scuds, and then obviously getting to the source, try to destroy the Scud launchers before they could ever even launch. And we were working with the Delta guys who were on the ground in Western Iraq, trying to find these launchers, because they have their range limited. So to get close enough to Israel, they had to be in Western Iraq to be within range. So, but that's a huge region.
Yeah.
There's not much out there. So we were, flying reconnaissance missions, and I got to fire the first rounds at what is still today to be considered either a Scud or one of the best mock-ups we've ever seen, because this thing, what raised a flag for me, and I realized it right away, is that there were no support vehicles. This thing was just sitting out in the middle of the desert. But when you look at something in an infrared system, you can see heat, right? Mm-hmm. So the road wheels were hot, so it looked like it had just been driven. It looked like a rocket should look. I mean, it had, there were thermal contrast in all the right places, I guess I would say, which is what a FLIR is seeing. And we were given permission to engage it. So rolled in and fired the first rounds at the thing. And maybe fortunately for us, it did not explode, because the expert who came to talk to us after this engagement said, if it had exploded, we were close enough, we probably would have lost the aircraft.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Which is not what you're thinking when you're diving in on this thing and trying to blow the crap out of it. I had weapon malfunction, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, did get to put some minigun rounds on the the Scud.
That's awesome though. That's pretty cool. You went hunting for Scud missiles. That's a cool story to tell on its own right there.
Yeah, it was an awesome experience. We were pretty pumped.
Were you surprised by how fast the Gulf War ended?
Yes, I mean, we were not part of the initial invasion. The unit was not, because there were all sorts of missions we were planning for. I mean, our primary mission was actually to liberate the hostages. If you recall, there were hostages taken and they were being held in Kuwait. So that's what we were training for. And then right before Desert Storm kicks off, the hostages get released. So we're now a specialized unit without a mission. So, and it happens a lot. I mean, all of us want to go and all of us want to be part of something. And in that particular case, there was nothing for us to do. So the war kicks off. We're watching it from Clarksville, which is Fort Campbell. And then this whole Scud issue presents itself, and the decision was made that it required special operations units to do it. So we deployed specifically for that.
The Gulf War is one of those examples of where we came in, did whatever it was. We were wanting to kick Iraq. I was a kid when the Gulf War kicked off. My dad was there with the 377th Combat Support Hospital. He was Army also. And it was one of those things where they pushed into Kuwait. We would go in, push them out of Kuwait, and then we stop there. Dip them. We don't do this long like country building thing that we've been doing for the global war on terror. Get in. Here's a decisive mission that we got to take care of, and get out and let it be. I wish we'd kind of get back to more like that. And there were a lot of people upset. I mean, I'm sure you could talk more about that, but I know there were people upset when we pulled out of Kuwait or out of Iraq so fast during the Gulf War, because I think we had an agreement to work with the not Houthis. I can't believe I called them the Houthis. I can't remember. I'm sorry. Say it again.
Kuwaitis?
Not the Kuwaitis. There was a group in Iraq that they're like their own group, but they're in Iraq.
Kurds.
The Kurds. Yeah. I think we were supposed to be helping the Kurds. Like the Kurds expected us to do more, and to kind of safeguard them more. But I don't know. I don't know. Do you have anything you want to add more about the Gulf War in your guys' role there?
No, I mean, I consider it another very successful mission. We even if there was not a lot of actual destroyed Scuds, the fact that we were out there patrolling and the Iraqis knew it inhibited their ability to maneuver and launch as freely as they had been. So it had an effect. Back to your point about the withdrawal, President Bush took a lot of heat over that, but I agree with you. And Somalia is my example of seeing firsthand how difficult this is. Trying to change a country, rebuild it, whether it's infrastructure or culture or education or military or political, it is a very difficult thing to do. And our missions need to be clearly defined. And once they're achieved, we need to call it and pull out. And there's a few times here recently where we have not done that, and we've paid the price for it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people you talk to, especially like officers and stuff too, will tell you like the war in Afghanistan wasn't a 20-year war. It was 21-year wars. There was like, my battalion is going to be there. We're rotating in, and here's our mission for that. And no one ever really talked about the overall strategic goal of what we were supposed to do. And we see the results of, I guess, that mismanagement and not very good planning. In Somalia, so for that, a little background is we were originally there. The U.S. was there. They sent in the Marines, I think, from the MEU for humanitarian reasons, correct?
Yes.
And then what got you guys rolled into this?
So, it was initially humanitarian. There were relief organizations there trying to feed the starving people. There were estimates that I have read, 400,000 people had already died of starvation, and there were 7 million at risk. And unfortunately, there's a civil war going on in Somalia. So the relief organizations couldn't distribute the food. It was being stolen. So that's when the U.S. military got involved in December of 1992. Over the next 6 months, it was actually quite successful. The security was in place. The food was getting to people who needed it. The the relief organizations were being protected from the warring clans. But the mission started to change to what we just talked about, more nation building instead of, hey, look, we're in here to provide security and starvation and we're going home. Mm-hmm. That's what should have happened. A contributing factor is that we transitioned from the Bush administration to the Clinton administration right in the middle of all this. So that happened at the beginning of 93. You got a brand new administration. They don't understand the military. Some would argue they don't even like the military. They don't understand how difficult these things are. They've got this very, idealistic view of the world and how things work. Why wouldn't they want us to help them bring their country back to life, right? Well, because the people that are in charge lose their authority if you change the whole dynamic. So they're going to resist. And that's what happened. This guy, Muhammad Farah Aidid, he's the most powerful clan leader. As this is going, he's going to lose all his authority because there's an effort here to put in place, a provisional government that is elected by the people. And that's just, he doesn't want to see that. So he starts to undermine what's going on with propaganda broadcasts, which are very effective, by the way, for that don't believe that you can influence the hearts and minds of the people, which in some cases is the most powerful tool you have. Mm-hmm. He was doing that, and he was also attacking UN forces, and then ultimately he will blow up a Humvee with 4 U.S. soldiers on board, and that's on August 8th of 1993. And when that happens, that is the final straw to trigger a deployment of Task Force Ranger. The original forming of Task Force Ranger was back in June when Aidid's forces killed 24 Pakistanis in a conflict in the street where they were trying to confiscate weapons from the Habr Getter clan, which is Muhammad Farah Aidid's clan. So it's just a series of things going back and forth, hostilities that escalate over the summer, and then ultimately the conclusion that this guy Aidid has got to go. We're going to capture him. And based on the success in Panama of capturing Manuel Noriega, or at least, chasing him into a hole, the nod is given to the Special Operations Forces to go mission. Anyone could have done it, honestly. I mean, it didn't have to be as complicated as we made it, had the decision been made earlier. And why I say that is Aidid was still making public appearances through the summer of 93. You could have rolled up with, a couple of tanks, APCs, and an infantry platoon and taken him down. We knew where he was. He had little security. That's what should have happened. Instead, we waited, and he realized, okay, they are coming after me, and he went underground. And just like bin Laden, once these guys go underground, it becomes a much more difficult mission because you don't know where they are. So, you can have all the capability in the world. If you don't know where to send it, it's not of any value for you. So we deployed, didn't know where he was. He's effectively hiding. And even after only a couple of weeks, our leadership basically phones the rear and says, hey, look, we don't know where this guy is. Why don't we take out his infrastructure? So we got the green light to then start taking out his senior leadership. And we did. We captured quite a few of those guys, including the number 2 man, a guy named Osman Otto. Anybody that's seen the movie, this is the guy that's smoking the cigar. And we actually captured him. I will say this, though. The movie does not portray how humble that guy looked when he got pulled off that aircraft after, being captured in that assault. He was not arrogant at all. He was a puppy. Anyway, we go through the process of capturing all these other people, and ultimately on October 3rd, we're after 2 more top 10 personnel when this thing turns into a huge hornet's nest.
Yeah, and I mean, in addition to indecisiveness, allowing him to just walk around and stuff like that, it's also, I imagine, allowing him to build up his defenses, build up plans for when it finally does happen. What are we going to do? And, we see the results of that when we see hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, quickly amass, into the streets around the assault was going on. Before we get into that though, like, what was it the day of, when you did you know this was coming up, or was this a standby mission? Like, as soon as we find this person, you're going to get the call, and you guys got to be ready to go for it.
Yeah, all these missions. So the October 3rd mission is the seventh one that we will have done, and they were all the same. We with maybe a couple of exceptions, we got intel that a person on the list was at a specific location. We confirmed that accuracy of that intel, and then within minutes we were in the air. So on October 3rd, it's the same thing. The first wind we get that we're going to launch, I'd have to go back and look at the detailed timeline, but in rough terms, I'd say it's maybe 2:00 in the afternoon, and we're launching by like 15:30 or 3:30.
Nice. How did you feel? How comfortable did you feel flying around Mogadishu at this point? You said this is your seventh mission. How was it different than other areas that you had flown and done operations in, or was it pretty similar?
So in general terms, Somalia, Mogadishu is similar to Panama, actually. I mean, it's a pretty big city. Panama City's gigantic. Cologne's pretty big. So Mogadishu is similar, in terms of the feel. A lot more enemy in Mogadishu than there were in Panama. In Panama, it's really us against the PDF. It's not us against the Panamanian people. Whereas in Somalia, Adid had used his propaganda effectively, and by the time October rolls around, we're fighting the Somali people. I mean, they don't like us anymore. They want us out of there. He's convinced them that we're bad, and they're supporting him in anything that would hurt us. That specific mission, I've always talked about 4 risk factors that were present, because we talked about what a flight lead was earlier, but I was a flight lead on this mission. So when this mission comes down, I'm in the ops center with the ground force commanders and the leadership. And, we're getting our quick brief before we run out and brief our crews. And here's what we're going to do. There were 4 things about this mission that, to me, raised the flag a little bit. One, it's the 7th mission. So they've seen us do this 6 times. They kind of know how this is going to go. And as you alluded to earlier, they start to build some counter capability. They had started using RPGs. They were not using RPGs on the first few missions. Now they realize they can be used effectively, and they used them big time on October 3rd. So 7th mission, daytime. We've talked extensively about night vision capability and training at night. It gives us a tactical advantage. But when there's a person you're after, it's a decision, right? Do I wait and assume they're going to stay, or do I go now because I know they're there and I have a chance to catch them? Not my call. That's the senior leadership's call. But the decision was, we'll accept the risk of daytime. It's in the worst part of the city, meaning it's in the Black Sea area. Pick a city in the third world. It's got its, bad neighborhood. This is it. This is where all Adid's supporters are. That's where their weapon supplies are. We know all that. And then the 4th one is the streets are too narrow to land in this part of the city. So we have to fast rope everybody in, and we're going to get everybody out by ground vehicle, because we could do a rooftop extraction, but without getting too far down in the weeds, you think about a helicopter landing on a roof, very vulnerable. I mean, you can be shot at from every direction, and it takes longer because you're probably loading from one side, and you're just silhouetted, right? It's just not a good thing to do. And you got to go in one at a time, right? If you're on a rooftop. So we decide best way to get everybody out is ground vehicles. So those 4 risk factors, probably some of them were present on every mission, but not all 4 that I can recall. And I just remember, going out to the aircraft thinking, this is going to be as challenging as any mission to date. And as it turned out, it certainly was.
During the mission, when did the first problem start to arise? When did you know things are starting to go wrong?
Well, I mean, the first thing that went wrong was we had a Ranger fall from one of the aircraft in my flight, not my aircraft, but my Chalk 4. And that's Todd Blackburn. He was hurt pretty bad. And that's just something else the ground force has got to deal with, right? They got all this other stuff. They got to get themselves in place, establish their fields of fire, get their comms squared away, make sure they account for everybody. It's just all this basic nuts and bolts kind of thing. And now all of a sudden you got this badly injured Ranger that you got to get out of here and get to safeties. Good news is that they dealt with it. He also fell from the aircraft away from where they were supposed to be inserted. So now you've got ground element not where you thought they were. And again, communications in an urban environment are probably still not very good today.
Yeah.
Certainly were not very good 30 plus years ago. So it's just, it adds to the complexity of the operation when now you've got somebody that's sort of that lost platoon. It wasn't a platoon, but a squad that's kind of not where you thought they were going to be. Good news is recover from that. Probably take a few casualties as a result, but the mission itself is still rolling. Ultimately, I don't think anyone would argue what turns this thing on its head is the first Blackhawk shot down, and that's Super 6-1. They're in tight over the ground force trying to provide fire support, and they're hit with an RPG, and the aircraft crashes in the city. Both pilots are killed. Everyone in the back survives, but now, the ground force has got a tactical operation going on. They got a convoy trying to get to them to extract them. They've got a crashed aircraft now at another location, and we don't really have enough assets to handle even one of these. And now we have three things to deal with.
When, in a situation like this, people that may not have worked in aviation side of military or as fire support, when you're everyday part of the job is being okay with tons of comm. You have radios, multiple radios, usually air net, ground net, maybe an internal net. These are all different radio channels for those that don't know what I'm saying. How much can you describe how that can add to the chaos? All of the communications that's coming over at one time. You're the flight lead also, so you're tracking everything. How was that adding to the chaos, you think? The communications, the constant communication?
100%. We call it a helmet fire, meaning every net is transmitting at the same time, and you're trying to figure out, which is the one that I need to monitor most closely, so that I can maintain my situational awareness and know what's going on. And you certainly have to stay up in the air net. I mean, we've got an air to air, but you also want to know what's going on the ground. So you're listening to the air to ground net, you listen to the fires net, because you want to know what the attack assets are doing. You got the jock chiming in, trying to communicate with everyone. And once an aircraft goes down, everybody's got something to say, and it becomes very difficult to sort through it all. It ultimately will settle down a little bit, but in that moment, it's chaos.
Yeah, that's when the professionalism really has to come out. You have to really be able to manage that stress. And I think that's the issue a lot of people have getting up into, like I saw that a lot in TACP school, guys that wanted to become JTACs. Really good at fire support and stuff like that, but they had an issue managing a lot of inputs coming at them at once, because the expectation is you have all this information coming at you in highly stressful situations sometimes, and then you have to create a product, which is the fire support plan, that is safe and effective, and you have to do it quickly, and it's hard for some people to deal with that. I guess that's probably something that sets the 160th apart from the average unit of pilots, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more you do it, the better you get at it, or at least you can find out what is a person's threshold, and don't put them in a responsibility where they're going to encounter that. I like I said, this is my fourth combat rotation now in 5 years, so I was about as good as I would probably ever be as a pilot at that point in my life, and I felt able to keep track of everything, fly the aircraft, and still make decisions.
Now, after 6-1 was shot down, what was your role? You've dropped your customers off. 6-1 gets shot down. What are you doing at this point?
Yeah, so I've just taken my flight north of the city, and we're holding because the exfil is going to be ground vehicles, so we're a contingency force at this point. And then after 6-1 goes down, after the dust settles, the commander calls me and asks me to replace 6-1 over the target. Now, we had not been doing that. Obviously knew, what the intricacies of that were, and jumped at the chance. I mean, we live to contribute as much as we possibly can to the mission. So, again, I'll use a football analogy. It's like the receiver that doesn't get any looks. You want the ball thrown to you. So,
yeah.
We want to be that crew. So, immediately jumped out of the pattern, and flew as fast as we could straight to the target, rolled in. The one disadvantage we had is we did not have snipers on board. We just have our crew chiefs with their miniguns. That's a little bit of overkill in this specific point in time because we don't know where everybody is. We know there's a crashed aircraft, but we don't know where it is. Mm-hmm. We know there's isolated squads moving here and there, but we don't know where they are. And it's an urban environment. So you can't see anybody. They're all taking cover in buildings. And so going in there and squirting off 4,000 rounds a minute of 7.62 is probably not a good idea. Mm-hmm. So our first priority, and I said this to the crew chiefs on the way in, I said, I'm arming your guns, but do not shoot until we all feel like we have a good situational awareness and understand, where all the friendlies are. And as it turned out, we never fired around because we only made it around the target, I would guess, maybe 3 times before we got hit by an RPG.
Did they, for 6-1 and you guys, was it a single RPG shot or did they try to volley like multiple shots at you at once? See, hopefully one will hit.
Well, you can't really see them very well in the daytime because it's still daytime.
Yeah.
The intel told us after the fact, and again, this is third, fourth hand information for me because I'm out of the loop in hospitals when all this stuff is being analyzed. But as I understand it, they estimate they fired 150 RPGs at us.
Oh, wow.
But they went all in. I mean, they knew their confidence had been boosted because they shot one down a few weeks prior, and they've realized that, shoot enough of them, you'll hit an aircraft. And if you hit an aircraft, it's probably going to come down. Mm-hmm. So they went all in. We were only hit by one, but I don't know how many they shot at us.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's insane to think about having 150 RPGs flying around in the sky. That would not feel good. That would not be a good feeling. So you said you only made it one time around the target before you guys got shot down. How did you know you'd been hit, and did you know what you'd been hit by when you got shot?
Yeah, so it was not to worry too much about this, but it was about 3 times around the target. But anyway, when it got hit, I was flying. And I try to explain to people, when you're in a tight orbit in a helicopter, you're in a bank, right? So I'm in the right seat. It's a left bank. So I'm looking through the cockpit at the ground as I'm flying to try to, figure out where the heck is everybody. And when the RPG hit the tail, never saw it coming, it felt like hitting a speed bump, a good-sized speed bump, going too fast in a parking lot. Everybody knows what that feels like, kind of jolts the whole car. So that's what this felt like. So I rolled out, meaning got the wings level, and straight ahead of us is the airfield. I knew we'd been hit by something, but I had no idea what. Didn't know where either, just knew it had hit the aircraft somewhere. Everything looks okay. Instruments are all okay. Controls are responding the way they should. But it was a big enough jolt where I thought, we need to go get a look at this. So I think I transmitted that we were heading to the airfield. Maybe I just said it to the crew because it's only 2 or 3 minutes ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, what I didn't know is that the RPG had damaged the gearbox that drives the tail rotor, blown a piece of it off. So imagine, again, like your car transmission, half of it's fallen off. You're not going to go very far down the interstate before the whole thing just disintegrates with all the transmission fluid gone. And that's what happened. It basically disintegrated. And so the tail rotor disintegrates, the gearbox disintegrates, a big part of the tail boom came off. And now we're spinning like, if you've ever seen a video of a helicopter spinning out of control, that was us.
Man, that's horrifying. You're out of control. I mean, what's going through your mind in that kind of situation when you're like, hey, I'm trying here, but nothing's working. This is it. Like the ground is inevitable.
I remember looking at my foot because what controls your heading in a hover is your pedals. And I'm pushing my pedals the direction I know they need to be pushed to stop this thing from spinning, and nothing's happening. And at that point I realized, all right, the tail rotor's gone. So you still have some authority because the main rotor is still working okay. So you can keep it level, but you're spinning so fast out of control you can't really see anything except the horizon. Mm-hmm. And the only thing you can do is shut the engines off because what's causing that spin is the torque from the engines. Just like a drill in your hand. When you pull the trigger and you feel it want to twist, that's what's happening to the fuselage of a helicopter when the engines are driving the rotor. So when you shut the engines off, that torque goes away, the spin stops, but now you have no power and no tail rotor, and you fall out of the sky. And that's what happened.
Do you remember, how much do you remember after that? Did you lose any, did you go unconscious? Did you lose any parts of that event?
Oh yeah. I don't remember the impact. And, you would think after 30 plus years, if your brain is trying to fool you into thinking it doesn't remember it, you dream about it or something. I've had zero recollection at all of hitting the ground ever. The last thing I remember is making what I thought was talking to Ray, which I actually transmitted. It's the same button. It just, you push it a different way to transmit out or transmit in just to the crew. And, in the moment, I think I pulled the radio trigger instead of the intercom trigger. And I said Ray. And I don't know if I was saying Ray to get him to shut the engines off or what. That's the only thing that came out well, I made a quick call before that intentionally over the radio saying that we had lost the tail rotor and that we were going in hard because I knew we were. Mm-hmm. And then you hear me say Ray, and that's actually captured on the recording, and then nothing. And I don't remember saying Ray, and I don't remember hitting the ground. Knocked unconscious, and then I regained consciousness. We estimate anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes later.
But because there's a battle raging, now you're on the ground. They're trying to get to you guys. They're trying to get to 6-1, secure both those crash sites and stuff like that. What was it like to be trapped in the helicopter or, unable to do anything? Was there a feeling of helplessness at that point?
Not initially. I had my MP5. I had a broken femur and a broken back. So I knew I couldn't go anywhere, but I felt like, with this submachine gun, I could probably, we could hold our own for a few minutes. Ray was not injured quite as bad as I was. I'm not sure why. Was able to get out of the aircraft. And so I figured between the two of us, we can maybe do something here for a few minutes. But then before I know it, Randy Sugart and Gary Gordon are standing next to the cockpit. And they, at the time, I didn't know how they got there. I just thought they were part of a rescue force. So I'm relieved at this point, thinking, wow, they're going to throw us on a vehicle or a helicopter. We'll get out of here and, debrief this thing, and we'll be flying again in a few months. I didn't realize it was just two of them. And over the next maybe 15 minutes, they're gunned down and we get overrun.
At what point do you realize that you're overrun? I mean, can you just, I guess, walk us through the events after that? Because now, after they're overrun and you end up getting taken as a prisoner and being held, that's obviously just a wild time in this story. Can you but not really covered so much in the movie, which a lot of people are familiar with, in the book and stuff. Can you kind of discuss that, that part of it for us?
Yeah. So Gary Gordon goes down first, and I hear him say he's hit. Randy then comes back around the nose of the aircraft, and he asks me if there's any more weapons in the aircraft. And, you were asking about how I felt earlier. That sense of relief is now gone, and I realize we're taking losses. I've only seen 2 guys here, and one of them's down. And now, obviously, Randy's out of ammunition or getting close. Good news is I knew where the crew chief's M16s were. I pointed him in that direction. He went and got them. And he gave me what I believe was Gary's weapon. And it only had a half a magazine or so left in it. I fired those rounds out. He went around the nose. I heard him make a radio call. And the last transmission I heard was a reaction forces en route. Cause for maybe a little bit of optimism, but not a whole lot. And then a big increase in shooting goes on the left side of the aircraft. I'm on the right. This is on the left. I'm laying on my back because of my injuries. They got me out of the aircraft and I'm on my back. And then it all stops. And all I hear is yelling and screaming and debris and, obviously not American voices. And I realized that everybody else over there is probably gone and they're going to come around the nose here any moment. And they did. And I just figured I was dead for sure.
That's got to be. I mean, I can't even understand how that would feel. I mean, that's those situations that you hear about, like, oh, old military stories that this happened to someone, that it could happen, it's a possibility, but I don't think anybody ever actually thinks it would happen to them. In this situation.
Yeah, I certainly didn't. And you just do what you've been trained to do, I guess, which is what I reverted to at that point. And I have to credit survival school. Had I not been to survival school, I honestly don't know what I would have done, because they teach you strategies for various situations like this, and that's what I reverted to.
How long before you spoke with someone that spoke English, so you could at least know what was going on, or they could feed you some information, or
Yeah, it would be that night. I would say, but very limited. And I was hurt bad.
Yeah.
So I don't even know that what I was doing or saying would have made any sense. But at that point, my femur fracture was a compound femur fracture, so my bone had come out of my leg. I'd been shot. I was in bad shape. But I seem to recall having a brief conversation with somebody that night. I don't really remember what was said, but and then the main conversation would be with the doctor, who ultimately comes the following night.
Yeah. What was going through your mind, though? I mean, you say your SEER training kicks in. What kind of strategies, were you going? I mean, just kind of, I guess, tell us, how did you make it through this? How did you relate with the enemy, or make them relate to you, so that you just weren't killed immediately?
Yeah, well, what I didn't know is that they had orders to capture an American. And I was, at that point, as I understand it, the only one left alive at Crash Site 2. So I had that in my favor, I guess. Maybe I could have done anything and I still would have survived. But I mean, the main thing is, I can't say that, there was a switch flipped, but they teach you things like, just don't do stupid things. Like, if you watch a John Wayne movie and, John Wayne's in this situation, he spits in their face. You know what I mean? Like, the real world, that's a ticket to getting a bullet in your forehead. I mean, you just have to not aggravate the situation, I guess, and be as non-responsive as could be. You know what I mean? Don't cry out. Don't spit at them. Don't call them idiots. Don't you know what I mean? Just, I don't want to say, it's not really passive, but it's, don't aggravate the situation, because nobody's accountable at this point. They shoot me, nobody knows the difference. And you have to do everything you can to survive. And that's essentially the mode that I switched to once, the overrun was a done deal.
Yeah. You have to, like you said, you don't want to aggravate the situation. You almost have to kind of build some rapport there, because that you do whatever you can to stay alive, keep your honor clean and all that. And I don't know, it's just, that's pretty crazy. And you're also injured. You've been shot. I understand it was like a superficial wound. You've been shot. You're talking about, you've got this fractured femur, which on its own has got to be horrific. But now it's a compound fracture. Now it's a compound fracture in a third world country, where who knows if you're going to get an infection or something from that. You got a broken back. I mean, what a crazy situation. When they brought in the doctor, how much could they actually do for you?
Not much, because, this was a big fight, most of which I was completely unaware of. I mean, it went on for 15 more hours after I got shot down. And the Somali estimates are as many as 2,000 wounded. So he's been dealing with all these wounded Somalis, because he's a Somali doctor.
Mm-hmm.
and he has no supplies left. I mean, he showed up, I call it his blue tackle box. I think he had betadine solution, aspirin, and some forceps or whatever that he's probably used on 25 people before he got to me, you know. So not much he could do. He did clean. His biggest concern was my femur because, you know, that's a, you know, I mean, I've heard stories of people in sports that broke their femur, went to the hospital and got an infection, you know, so that's a precarious injury to have in a situation like that. So he cleaned it the best he could with that betadine solution, and you know, there's no pain meds here, so he's probing the thing with this wad of betadine, trying to clean it all out and put a bandage over it. It's a miracle. I never got an infection. I don't know how that I didn't.
Yeah. I understand that you got a radio at some point and you got a visit from the Red Cross as well.
Yeah. The Red Cross visit was a complete surprise. I had no idea it was coming. There were some hints, like they cleaned up the room. I mean, before the Red Cross came, there was dead flies everywhere, food all over the place. I mean, it's like I was living in a dump. They cleaned that all up. They put some fresh pajamas on me. They brought in a mattress. I'd been laying on the concrete up to that point. I still had my original clothing on. So I'm thinking something's got to be happening here. And sure enough, the Red Cross shows up. But one woman who had been told without notice, hey, if you want to go see the prisoner, come with us. And she just grabbed her, you know, whatever she could grab and came. I think the only thing she had with her was a form letter that I could write a letter to my family, which I did.
Now, they also made a recording of you. You know, they were asking you some questions and stuff. Was this before or after the Red Cross visit?
Before. It happened within the first 24 hours. Yeah, they were trying to get me to say, you know, political statements, which really is interesting because to me, they understand the significance of that better than the average American does. Mm-hmm. You know, they're considered sort of, I don't know, you know, certainly inferior to us from a military perspective, but they realize the significance of a political statement much, much more. They were not asking questions about, you know, are you with Delta Force? Are you, how many operators did you have with you? You know, what kind of weapons? They weren't asking any of that stuff. There was two main things they were asking, which they ended up getting on tape. One was this is their exact words, how you think this mission in Somalia. And I said, I'm a soldier. I do what I'm told. And then they said, you kill the people innocent. And I said, innocent people being killed is not good. And the survival school would consider those textbook answers for the last 30 years, as far as I know. And I don't think they knew what they had. They thought I answered their questions, and they put that out on the airwaves. And in fact, in hindsight, at least the survival experts tell me that actually helped me far more than it helped them, because now there's evidence that they have a prisoner, and you know the international community is going to expect them to abide by the Geneva Convention and treat me humanely and all those things. Whereas when nobody knows whether I'm alive or dead, they can do what they want.
Now, with the radio that you received, at what point did you start getting actual updates of what had happened, what occurred?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at my notes to be exactly 100% right here, but I think it was around day 5 or 6 where they, you know, the thing they teach you in survival school is if they're offering you something and they're not asking for anything in return, take it. Because, I mean, that might be, you know, your last bit of food. That might be your last glass of water. That might be, you know, you might never get another chance to get this. So don't play hardball and say, you know, I don't want anything unless they're asking you to do something. Mm-hmm. And they said, you want a radio? And I said, sure. And they brought me a transistor radio, and I listened to Armed Forces Radio broadcast in Somalia, and then the BBC, which was also broadcasting in Somalia. And that's where I started to learn about how big the battle was, you know, how many fatalities there were, what was going on politically outside. It was very helpful.
That's crazy that they would even let you have a radio. Like, that's something I would never expect if I was taken prisoner, that they would be like, here's a radio where you can have all this information, this access to the world.
It's a crazy story. I mean, it is. And that's part of why I wrote my book, because my book is more focused on that part of it. It's not focused on the battle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in my book, the battle ends in chapter 1. You know, so it's almost a continuation of Black Hawk Down, and that's kind of what I felt like that part of the story had not been told, and that's why I wrote it.
Can you talk about how the U.S. forces knew that you had a radio and how they utilized that?
Yeah. So actually, now that you're helping me recreate the timeline here, the Red Cross knew I had a radio, and so that the radio preceded the Red Cross visit, and they told the unit that I had a radio. So they did all sorts of things. They started requesting songs for me. So I'm hearing dedications. I mean, you know, you could have, and does it get more bizarre than this? Probably not. You know, the one thing that I'll never forget is I got a request or a song dedication, pretty sure I'm correct here, from Bull Briley, who was a good friend of mine, Donovan Briley. And it was the song, Whoops, There It Is, I think, or I Like Big Butts or something, because it was just one of those songs of the time, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it was typical Donovan. And what I didn't know is that Donovan was dead. And it was just somebody else was doing it on his behalf.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was probably the last devastating thing to learn once I got released, is that Cliff and Donovan were gone, because I did not learn that over the radio or prior to that point.
That's interesting that hadn't been covered on either. Well, I'm not surprised it wouldn't be covered on AFN, but you'd think BBC would have something like that on there. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because everyone, again, like you mentioned, everyone knows about the battle itself and stuff. There's been so much coverage of that. But you were oblivious to all of it. You know, you were over here fighting your own battle, trying to just stay alive, not knowing, I'm sure, that there's negotiations happening or anything like that, or not maybe aware of what level that they're at. How were you treated? I mean, were you being treated pretty well, do you think, you know, considering?
Yeah, not initially. I mean, initially it was pretty rough. You know, you just got out of a firefight. You know what I mean? They're shooting you and you're shooting them. So the hostilities are running high. But, you know, you mentioned earlier about building rapport. I didn't really do this on purpose. I was just trying to do what I learned to do in survival school. And I just did a few things that I do think built rapport and I guess humanized me. In fact, when the Red Cross came back and talked to the unit, they described what they said was the reverse Stockholm syndrome. The Stockholm syndrome is when the prisoner sympathizes with their captors. Mm-hmm. The Red Cross said it was like the opposite, that my captors were sympathizing with me. And again, this wasn't some grand strategy. I was being me, but I was also trying to do what they taught me to do in survival school. And in the end, I think it did cause them to build a relationship with me, which I think, you know, ultimately will, if there's a rescue attempt and their orders are, you know, shoot him before he's rescued, it's going to cause them to at least pause. You know, if we've been communicating, you know, like this head guard Farimbi, you know, I talked to him about his many wives and you know, they had this drug they called cot that they chewed, and they brought some in one time and they wanted me to have some, and I acted like I was going to do it. And then when the guards all left, I threw my portion to Farimbi, so he ended up with a double rash, and his big smile came across his face. I mean, just, you know, stupid little stuff like that. And he was with me from basically day 3 or 4, I can't remember, through the end, which is not that long, but when you're with someone 24/7, you know, you start to realize that that's a human on the other side of this equation.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Did you know, following this event, have you been in contact with anyone that was on the Somali side? Like, do you know who the doctor was? I don't know. It's 2024. It'd be easy to email someone if they're still alive. Yeah. I don't know if that's a thing that's happened.
So they reached out to me, actually. And I went to the unit and I said, hey, look, you know, they've reached out to me. Give me some guidance here, you know. And I was a little surprised. And of course, it all depends on who you talk to, right? I'm sure if I'd have talked to this other person, I would have got a different answer. But basically was told, you know, it's your call. If you want to if you want to meet with them, I mean, you're obviously not going to disclose any information, but in terms of whether or not you want to meet with them, it's up to you. So I decided to meet with this guy. Now, he is not any of the characters we've talked about so far. He's an intermediary, and I agreed to meet him in a public place in Nashville. And I got there early, and I'm, doing the Tom Clancy thing, and I'm in some corner of the room looking, trying to make sure this is not some sort of setup. And the guy shows up, and I spot him like that. Somalis have a very distinct physical, have very distinct physical characteristics. There's other countries in Africa like this, but they're very European looking, very, slender build. And I mean, just based on his clothing, I knew as soon as he got there that this was him. And he sits down, and I waited a few minutes. He's obviously by himself. He's not looking around. There's nobody I could see anywhere. So I finally decided to go sit down with him. And they wanted me to be basically an intermediary between the Somalis and the American people. They even made a shirt, which I still have, that has a African-American hand and a Caucasian hand holding hands. And it says, U.S. Somali Alliance or something like that. I mean, it looked like a kid did it with finger painting. I mean, this wasn't very sophisticated. And they wanted me, and I basically at that point said, there's no way. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is so much bitterness and so much anger over what your people did. I can't do it. I mean, I in my mind, that would be betraying my comrades, and I can't do it. And I said, but there is something you could do for me. If you could recover any of the personal items from any of my crew or Randy or Gary and get those to me so I could get them to the families, that might be a step in the right direction. And they never got anything to me. And that was it. I did get letters from Adid. I got a letter from Farimbi, the head guard, and I got a letter from the doctor. The only one I wrote back to was Farimbi, because I felt like he went above and beyond to take care of me. And I simply said, thank you. You did more for me than I probably would have for you. And I appreciate that. It probably helped me survive. And that's all I did.
That's so crazy though, right? That they would, you're getting letters from a warlord wanting correspondence with you. I mean, it's interesting because I've had people from the Taliban and stuff comment on some of my videos before and be like, hey, I was there for that attack. I remember this. And I'm like, and then I thought about it. I was like, would I ever have a person from the Taliban on the podcast, just to talk to them and be like, why were you there? What was your take on it? And kind of understand, right? Have a different kind of understanding there.
Well, the situation is dramatically different depending on which foxhole you're in. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, your situation, I completely understand. After the videos came out of them, mutilating bodies and stuff, like, when did you hear about that they were dragging Americans through the streets and stuff?
Not till I was in the hospital all the way back at Fort Campbell.
Man.
I couldn't believe it because, there was some insulation around me once I got released,
Yeah.
Which I never really thought of it in these terms, but the Somalis gave me more access to the media than Americans did once I got released, but for my own sake, because that was awful. I mean, it was just awful. And all of those remains were from Crash Site 2 because, we were the only ones who were overrun. So it was my crew, it was Randy and Gary, and I can't understand it. I mean, I really can't. I still can't come to terms with that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't remember that. Obviously, I was probably 10 or 11 when that occurred. I learned about it later on. And then when it came fresh to mind when the Blackwater contractors were drugged through the streets and then burned and their bodies were hung from the bridge in Fallujah. And it was just like, I was thinking, like, how can a person do that? You know what I'm saying? Like, how can you do that? I could hate someone more than anything. They could be, but I can never see myself doing that. It's just, I don't understand it. And, I don't know. I get why you would not want to be like an ambassador for a group that did something like that.
Well, it's like Hamas. I mean, you think about the most recent example. some of the things that Hamas did in that attack
Mm-hmm.
are similar. I mean, I
Yeah.
political differences and cultural differences aside, how can a human being do that to other, in this case, perfectly innocent human beings? And again, I'll never understand it, and I don't understand the people who are advocating on behalf of the bad guys in this scenario, this current scenario, I would say.
It's I mean, you're in a bad situation when, you know, you've dehumanized a group so much that you can do something like that and be okay with it, you know, and that people celebrate it and stuff. I mean, I don't know, man. It's I just can't imagine the things that you've gone through and stuff, you know, that's people say you hear about it in the military, like, you know, if you get captured, if this happens, if that happens, and it's always scenario, it's a training thing. It's always this, but I think most people are like, this could never happen to me, you know? And unfortunately you became one of those people where it did happen to you. Do you have any advice or any kind of, I mean, anything you want to share, any kind of insights you want to share from that time for, I guess, if someone were to find themselves in an unfortunate situation?
Well, it goes back to things we talked about earlier. You know, putting everything you have into the opportunities that are presented to you. Doesn't have to be survival school. It could be anything. You know, don't strive to get a B. Strive to be number one in the class. You know, work hard, take advantage of the opportunity, and you just don't know how that experience may benefit you at some point in the future. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as, you know, being a POW. It could be, you know, just some ordinary aspect of your life where this nugget you picked up somewhere along the way because you worked a little harder is now going to give you an advantage on something in life.
Yeah, for sure, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I want to, maybe I can get you back on again and we can talk about what you did post Somalia, Mogadishu. I think we're over 2 hours now, so I don't want to keep it going for too long. People could check, you know, definitely pick up the book, In the Company of Heroes. It's been around for a while. It's well reviewed. I think everyone I know that's read it has enjoyed it. Michael Durant, is there anything that you want to, anywhere else you want people to look for you? What's your social media? Do you have a website and all that you want to share?
I have none of that. You know, sometimes I think, well, maybe I should, because it, you know, used in a positive way can be a great way to reach people. But the only place you'll find me is on LinkedIn, because I was in the business world for a long time, and I don't use that for anything other than purely business purposes. So for now, I'm sort of isolated socially, but you know, who knows? Maybe in the future.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm humbled. Seriously, it's an honor to have you here. Your story is one that's been told for a while, and a lot of people are aware of it, but it's always great to hear, you know, the person that lived through the events to come out and speak on it rather than reading it through a book or seeing it in a movie that's, you know, possibly distorted some. Everybody can check out my website. It's jkramergraphics.com. My Instagram's Former Action Guys and Former Action News. And that's it, man. I really appreciate it. Again, thank you.
All right. Take care.